I never imagined my life would turn out this way, but I suppose that's just how things go sometimes. It all started a few years back when my cousin Javier and his fiancée Alicia came to stay with me for what was supposed to be a couple of weeks. They had just moved to the city after graduating college, and their apartment wasn't going to be ready for another month. Since I had a decent-sized two-bedroom place, I figured letting them crash until they got settled wouldn't be a big deal. Little did I know, those couple of weeks would stretch into nearly half a year. Javier had lined up a job at a marketing firm, but apparently, there were some hiring freezes due to budget issues. Alicia was supposed to start her nursing clinicals, but there were some snags with her enrollment. Before I knew it, their short visit had become an extended stay, and the tension in my apartment was becoming unbearable. You see, Alicia had this knack for always saying the most passive-aggressive, backhanded comments about my life choices. I'm a 34-year-old single guy who works as a freelance graphic designer. Alicia had made it abundantly clear from the moment she stepped into my apartment that she looked down on my freelance career and unmarried lifestyle. Almost daily, she would make snide remarks about how I needed to find a real job and settle down already before it was too late. Her comments only grew more biting after a couple of months, when I decided to adopt a rescue dog named Rufus. Alicia acted as if taking in a puppy was the most irresponsible thing a single person could do. "You can barely take care of yourself. How are you going to manage a pet?" she would ask with dripping condescension. For Javier's sake, I did my best to ignore his fiancée's constant unsolicited opinions on how I should be living my life. But it got exponentially harder to bite my tongue once they started dating other family members against me. At every family gathering, Alicia would make underhanded comments to my parents and relatives about worrying for my future if I didn't get my act together soon. I could see the concern and doubt creeping into their eyes with each passing holiday. Things came to a head at my cousin Maria's birthday party last fall. After one too many thinly veiled jabs from Alicia about me turning into a crazy dog person, I decided I'd had enough. In front of the whole family, I exposed how I had been putting a roof over their heads for months while Javier looked for a job. In front of the whole family, I exposed how I had been putting a roof over their heads for months while Javier looked for a job and Alicia got her nursing certification in order. I laid it all out how they showed up saying it would just be for a couple weeks, but then kept extending their stay without contributing a dime. I went on to describe the daily barrage of Alicia's belittling comments about my unconventional career path and life as a single guy. How she would roll her eyes whenever I mentioned a new freelance gig. How she not so subtly questioned whether I could properly care for Rufus since I didn't have a wife and kids of my own. But worst of all, I revealed how Alicia had been secretly turning my own family against me, spreading doubts about my stability and life choices behind my back. With each holiday gathering, I could sense them becoming more disillusioned with the path I had chosen. As I aired out all the grievances I had been bottling up for months, you could have heard a pin drop. The looks on my relatives' faces shifted from shock to discomfort to outright anger at Javier and Alicia. My mom's eyes welled up with tears, realizing she had allowed this wedge to be driven between us. Alicia turned bright red, her mouth opening and closing but no words coming out. Javier just stared at the floor, unable to even look me in the eye after being exposed as the ingrates they were. Finally, he muttered, "Let's just go!" And they hastily made their exit, leaving the rest of the party in tense silence. The aftermath played out similarly to your story. My phone blew up with relatives demanding an explanation or apology. Javier and my parents eventually iced me out completely. Alicia certainly didn't lift a finger to mend fences, instead choosing to play the victim. It took about a year, but I realized those relatives who had turned on me so easily weren't people I wanted in my life anyway. Javier made his choice to remain loyal to his manipulative wife over his own family. As painful as it was, their absence helped me focus on the people who truly mattered, my friends, who had my back, and Rufus, who showered me with unconditional love. For a while, I was able to put that toxic situation with Javier and Alicia behind me. I doubled down on my freelance work, taking on more clients and bigger projects. Rufus was an endless source of joy, and we became inseparable adventure buddies. My friend group also rallied around me in a big way after the family drama, but of course, the universe had other plans to keep me from total peace. about 6 months after cutting ties with Javier's side of the family. I started receiving odd letters and emails from Alicia's mother, Clara. At first, they were tame, talking about missing me at gatherings, asking if we could reshape our relationship, blah blah blah. I just ignored them. Then, things took a turn for the disturbing. The messages became unhinged rants about how I had torn her daughter's life apart with my classless outburst. Clara painted Alicia as a fragile victim, saying she had plunged into a depression due to the trauma I caused at Maria's party. The accusations grew increasingly vicious with each correspondence. I finally had to get the police involved when Clara started leaving voicemails threatening to make me pay if I didn't issue a public apology and reconcile with her family. Looking back, I should have taken it more seriously from the start. One night, I returned home from a client meeting to find my apartment had been ransacked. Drawers overturned, couch cushions flung about, and Rufus trapped in the bathroom after being sprayed with a garden hose by the intruder. The place reeked of cigarette smoke. Clara's calling card. When I reviewed the security footage, I saw the unhinged woman had let herself in with a spare key Javier had given her, then proceeded to tear my home apart looking for something. As the police took their report and I held my whimpering pup, I realized this wasn't just about making a point anymore. This was deranged vengeance from a deeply disturbed and toxic person. I tried pressing charges, but without Clara directly admitting to the break-in, it was my word against hers. From there, the escalation only intensified. Tires, vicious hate mail, and packages filled with foul substances arriving weekly. My professional life also took a hit, as Clara started an online smear campaign with fake accounts, trolling me relentlessly and scaring off clients. The psychological torment lasted for over a year before Clara made her biggest mistake. The psychological torment from Clara lasted for over a year before she made her biggest mistake. I was out running errands one afternoon when I got a frantic call from my neighbor. She had seen a woman matching Clara's description hauling a gasoline canister toward my apartment door. I rushed home just as the fire trucks were arriving in response to the smoke billowing from my windows. Clara had attempted to burn my place to the ground, but thankfully the blaze was contained to just my living room before being extinguished. The deranged woman was arrested at the scene, crying maniacally about getting revenge for her. Poor Alicia. In the aftermath, the full depth of her unraveling was revealed. Clara had racked up thousands in debt, took out lines of credit in Alicia's name, and had been fired from her job months prior, all while concocting this twisted campaign against me. Alicia and Javier claimed to have no knowledge of what she was doing, but I'll never be fully convinced of that. Thankfully, the vandalism and threats ceased once Clara was charged and court-ordered to a psych evaluation. She pled down to a couple years in jail versus a longer sentence by claiming temporary insanity. Part of me still worries about her being unhinged enough to come after me again once released. The fallout destroyed what little relationship Javier and I still had. At Clara's sentencing, he finally spoke to me only to castigate me for driving his mother-in-law to this, as if her deranged behavior was in any way justifiable. I realized then he was just as toxic as Alicia, and I pitted any future kids they might have. On my end, the ordeal took a heavy emotional and financial toll. Between the property damage, legal fees, and lost wages from clients who bailed during Clara's smear campaign, I nearly went bankrupt and had to start completely from scratch. Rufus was also deeply traumatized by the invasion of our home. The one bright side is that, for the first time in years, most of my family realized the toxicity I had been dealing with and began extending olive branches. Though it's still a work in progress, a lot of fences have mended over the shared disgust at what Clara put me through. These days, I'm focused on just living my life with Rufus, taking it one day at a time. I've implemented extra security, and always have a wary eye over my shoulder in case Clara ever sets her sights on me again. But for now, the nightmare is over, and I plan to appreciate the calmer days as long as they last. Just when I thought I was finally free of that toxic cycle of drama, life threw me another curveball. About 6 months after Clara's sentencing, I received a bombshell letter in the mail. It was from Alicia. At first, I angrily crumpled it up, assuming it was another deranged attempt to harass me. But something made me smooth it out and give it a glimpse. According to Alicia's letter, she and Javier had decided to separate and file for divorce. She revealed that in the aftermath of Clara's explosive downward spiral, Javier had also unraveled into his own pit of alcohol and gambling addiction. Alicia claimed she could no longer subject herself or her young daughter to his self-destructive behavior, but that wasn't even the biggest revelation. Alicia then dropped the real bombshell: her daughter wasn't actually Javier's child. She had conceived from a previous fling years prior, while taking a break from Javier during college. She had lied and led him to believe he was the father all these years. According to the letter, Alicia's guilt had been eating away at her during the chaos with Clara. She stated she could no longer live with deceiving Javier and her own daughter about her paternity. She had decided to come clean as part of her effort to become a better, more honest person moving forward. And here's where I came into the picture. Alicia said the biological father was actually an old fling of mine from over 5 years ago. We had a casual thing for a few months before parting ways, and I had moved on, never knowing I had a child out there. The letter went on to say that Alicia didn't expect anything from me, financially or otherwise. She merely wanted to clear her conscience by informing me of the truth in case I ever wanted to have a relationship with my daughter. She provided her new contact info, and that was it. Stunned was an understatement. I reread that letter dozens of times, my head spinning as I tried to process this life-altering information. After everything that hellish woman and her family had put me through, here was a revelation that rewrote my entire future. Of course, my initial reaction ran the gamut of emotions: anger at being deceived, sadness at missing the first years of my child's life, but also hope at the possibility of finally being a father someday. Part of me wondered if this was just another cruel game by Alicia, but my instincts told me she was being truthful, perhaps for the first time ever regarding her daughter. After ruminating for a couple of sleepless nights, I finally resolved to attempt contact with Alicia. As painful as reconnecting with her twisted universe could be, I knew I had to make the effort if there was a chance to finally meet my own daughter. I sent a brief reply email explaining I needed some time to process everything, but that I wished to open a dialogue about potential next steps. I expected that just opening that line of communication could potentially unleash yet another Pandora's box of drama and colliding allegiances. But this time, the turmoil might actually be worth navigating if it meant embracing my role as a father. I expected some pushback or gaslighting when I reached out to open a dialogue with Alicia. But her response was surprisingly understanding. She said she knew this revelation was earth-shattering and that she didn't expect me to be ready for any major decisions right away. Alicia proposed that we start slowly by meeting up for a low-pressure conversation, just the two of us. She emphasized there were no expectations other than to give me a chance to ask any questions and better understand the situation surrounding my potential daughter. Part of me still had doubts about her motivations, but I also realized this could be my one opportunity to get sincere answers directly from Alicia. Any lies or manipulation could burn that bridge permanently. Maybe her fresh start really did include a commitment to honesty, at least where her daughter was concerned. So against my better judgment, I agreed to meet her for coffee at a neutral spot. I have to admit, seeing Alicia again in person for the first time in years dredged up more conflicting emotions than I anticipated. She had the same judgmental look in her eyes that triggered so much resentment over the past turmoil she inflicted on me. However, Alicia did seem genuinely remorseful as she walked me through the timeline of events: how we had our brief fling, she got pregnant after our split, and then rashly lied to Javier about the paternity from the very beginning out of fear of losing him. She admitted it was the worst decision of her life, snowballing into years of guilt and deception that deeply scarred their relationship. As mad as I still was about how she had tried to demolish my life, I could almost empathize with the self-loathing spiral she must have experienced. Almost. The real gut punch came when Alicia showed me photos of her daughter, Lucia. She was 4 years old, with inquisitive green eyes and a curious smile that reminded me so much of myself at that age. Seeing this child, who was a part of me, yet still a total stranger, stirred up potent clashing emotions. After laying out the full story, Alicia reiterated that she wasn't expecting anything from me, be it financial support, custody agreements, or an instant committed relationship with Lucia. She said she merely wanted to come clean and give me the option to be involved if I felt ready. She did make one small request, however, that if I did eventually want to meet Lucia, she have time to gently prepare her daughter and explained the situation in an age-appropriate way. Understandable, given the gravity of appending a young child's reality. I spent the next few weeks in a fog, oscillating between anger at being deceived, sadness at losing precious time, but also cautious optimism at the prospect of finally being a dad, if Lucia wanted that connection. Every day seemed to bring new conflicting feelings. Then one afternoon, I got a frantic call from Alicia. She was at the hospital. Lucia had been accidentally struck by a car while riding her bike and was in critical condition. All I heard through the phone was a guttural, primal sobbing. In that moment, every ounce of baggage and lingering animosity just seemed so petty and inconsequential. I roared out of my apartment and sped to the hospital, my thoughts laser-focused on only one objective: being there for my daughter. The scene that awaited was a nightmare. Lucia was unconscious and hooked up to a dizzying array of machines, her tiny body wrapped in casts and gauze. Doctors somberly warned us it was too early to predict chances of recovery or permanent damage. In the midst of that harrowing vigil, as I clutched Alicia, who was heaving with anguished wails, I realized none of the previous toxicity mattered anymore. If this little girl was going to make it, she needed her parents to be fully present as a united front, not bitter adversaries. Holding vigil together over Lucia's bedside, Alicia and I had the chance to face our combined worst fear: the prospect of losing her forever before I even got the chance to really know her. In those tenuous days, any former resentments just melted away in tear-soaked hugs of solidarity. The next several weeks were an agonizing roller coaster as Lucia slowly stabilized but remained unconscious and unresponsive. Alicia and I became fixtures in the hospital's pediatric ICU waiting room, taking turns holding vigil by our daughter's bedside. In those endless hours, we had ample time to dissect every last detail of our tangled romantic history and how it had led us to this crossroads. I learned more about Alicia's struggles with her own abandonment issues stemming from her father walking out at a young age. It made her clinging so desperately to Javier more understandable, if still misguided. For my part, I opened up about the loneliness that made me crave independence and resist the idea of starting a traditional family. Perhaps if I had been more open to that vulnerability earlier in life, I could have avoided missing such pivotal years with my own daughter. The more we talked, the more those old walls started crumbling. We both had built up thick emotional armor that turned us into volatile, selfish people at times. But the prospect of losing Lucia made us realize how that hardened shell had done more harm than good. There were plenty of painful apologies exchanged for the deception, for the blows to my career and reputation, for the scorched earth campaign by Clara. We agreed that while forgiveness was still a process, we owed it to Lucia to claw our way out of that pit of toxicity once and for all. Then, after 2 agonizing weeks of unconsciousness, Lucia's eyes finally fluttered open. The doctors were amazed by her improbable progress, calling her a little miracle. Turns out she had inherited the stubbornness of both her parents and simply willed herself back to us. Those first few days of interacting with Lucia were a jumble of overwhelming elation and crippling nerves. She was groggy but could understand the basics: that I was her long-lost father, finally entering her life under incredibly scary circumstances. I'll never forget the purity of her first tight hug, so wholly devoid of any bitterness or preconceptions. From there, Lucia's recovery was still slow but steady. We went through bouts of intensive physical therapy, first relearning to walk, then strengthening her injured arm, then speech exercises. All the while, Alicia and I tried our best to create a united, loving environment for fostering her healing. Eventually, the day came for Lucia to leave the hospital. After a few polite rejections, Alicia and I extended the awkward invitation perhaps I could stay on with them temporarily to all be together as she kept recovering. Much to my surprise and relief, Lucia immediately piped up with an enthusiastic "Yes!" That first night back at Alicia's place, seeing Lucia peacefully slumbering in her bedroom after looking at death's door, it was a reminder of how trivial all my grievances from before felt now. All that mattered was savoring the fresh start with my daughter that I never could have imagined wanting.